article from the Harvard Business Review that nearly half of Americans without home internet were in Black and Hispanic households. It says here that almost 40% of the disconnected K through 12 students from Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities struggle not only with access but also with digital literacy. The people's voice. Welcome back. This is the people's voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the people's voice. Thanks for checking us out again this week. We greatly appreciate it. This week, I wanted to get into a subject that is in and out in terms of spotlight, because depending on the political climate, sometimes it's discussed, and then other times it becomes a non-existent conversation. But as always, I want to bring it to the forefront and shed some light on it, and hopefully this information is spread and we can enhance the discussion around this. So today I wanted to talk about the digital divide. And, for many of you who listen to the podcast, you might be aware of the digital divide, you might not. But if you are, then this will be a refresher, and hopefully I can provide some additional information regarding the digital divide and kind of where things stand. And then for those of you who may not be aware of it, this will be enlightening and probably shocking to many, especially here in the United States, because often the United States is seen as a wealthy nation, a superpower, all of those wonderful descriptions that go with being the United States. But there are many deficiencies, as we know, here in the country, particularly when it comes to access to resources. And today, the discussion about the digital divide is just that. This is about access to resources. So, as always, I want to start by giving a definition just for those who may not know what the digital divide is, or even for those who may have heard about it before, but maybe need to get a refresher about it so we can continue the conversation. So, the digital divide, what is that? The digital divide is a gap, and I'm reading the definition. This definition is from investopedia.com, and it gives a direct definition. So the digital divide refers to the gap between demographics and regions that have access to modern information and communications technology and those that don't. The term now encompasses the technical and financial ability to utilize available technology along with access to the internet. The gap it refers to is constantly shifting with the development of technology. So that's the definition of it. I think that was a kind of a long-winded way to describe it. Basically, the digital divide is a gap between those who have access to technology and those that don't. And that gap is, first of all, from a worldwide perspective, is huge. Worldwide, it's estimated that somewhere between 30 billion and 3.5 billion people around the world don't have access to, first of all, don't have access to internet at all. That represents almost half of the world's population. And when you do the breakdown, Many of those countries that don't have access to information are undeveloped countries. Many of those countries are on the continent of Africa. And you assume, because even as you're listening to this or you're watching this, that everyone at this point would have access to the technology. But the sad part about it is that many people don't. Now, what I just described is from a worldwide perspective. Now, today's discussion, I want to specifically focus in on the challenges of the digital divide here in America, because, again, depending on the season, and this is my personal opinion, I think the conversation goes in and out, but the problem still exists. So today we'll shed some light on it and give some details about it, and then, of course, review some of the solutions that have been implemented and also those that are still on the table that can be implemented to push this issue forward and to close the gap regarding access to adequate technology. Excuse me. So, what I wanted to do is discuss what has been done so far. And, there's been a lot of discussion lately because President Biden and his staff, or his cabinet, I should say, recently put together legislation, an act, which is called Internet for All. And the Internet for All Act basically has developed funding to close the digital divide here in America. I believe $65 billion or so has been proposed, and I believe that was part of the Jobs Act that was just recently signed, or may still be out there. Let me, confirm that. But $65 billion is being set aside to build out infrastructure, also to provide affordable access to broadband, high-speed broadband internet access. And, this initial act is a step in the right direction. But as we break this down a little bit, you'll find where the disparities are actually highlighted even more, because a lot of the funding is not going to go to the areas that truly need it. But I'll talk about that in a little bit. But let me get back. So in terms of the United States of America, there are over 66 million people in the United States today that do not have access to adequate internet or access to broadband internet. Now, there may be some areas where they have access to many much slower speeds, and then there are areas that have the internet infrastructure in place, but the cost for the residents to have internet access is so high that they can't afford it, and so they don't have the access. But it's 66 million, a little bit over 66 million people in the United States don't have access to internet. And now, out of the 66 million Americans that do not have access to internet, or cannot reasonably afford internet, out of that 66.4 million, 16.5 million of those are people of color, or black people, not even people of color, just black people that don't have either the means or the access. And going back to Biden's initiative, Internet for All, this is where the discrepancy falls into place. And I'll explain it here in a second, because the Internet for All Act, what it does, or what it has proposed, is that it's going to give $65 billion to deal with providing access to those who don't either have access to internet or don't have affordable access. The problem is is that the funding is broken down into two areas. First of all, you have the unserved portion of the country, and then you have the underserved portion of the country. The problem is that those areas that are considered unserved are more rural areas, areas where infrastructure is not even in place. And a lot of that funding will be allocated to that portion of the project. Matter of fact, it says almost 73% of that funding will go towards rural areas. Now, the problem is that what you have is that many people of color live in urban areas, okay? And they are considered underserved. So when you have the underserved population, they will only get what is left after the funding for the areas that are unserved are completed. Well, this, of course, puts many people of color into a bind, because that means that $65 billion will only be about 20% left after they allocate the money to the unserved community, which means that the gap won't be closed. It'll be addressed, but it won't be closed. And so this is a lot of the pushback regarding the Internet for All initiative, because although it is a great step in the right direction, it's really not addressing the serious problem where you have people who live in areas that have access, the infrastructure is in place, but the affordability is not there. So that needs to be addressed, because we all know access to internet is crucial at this time. Because access to internet is not just about having access for entertainment purposes. It's literally crucial to the survival of individuals living in our way, because everything is done via the internet. Matter of fact, let me play this clip. There is an audio clip that I want to play of the director of, let me see, what is she? Is the director of a community group, and she's going to explain about the need for internet and all of the different services that are connected to the internet, and the deficiency that comes about when people don't have access to it. So let me play that, and then we'll continue the conversation.
People are applying for jobs online, and they're asking people to apply for government services online. That means that there's a huge population of people who don't have access, who won't be able to engage in our society as a whole, but now they won't even be able to get jobs, so self-sufficiency is a big problem.
And that was Cherie Mitchell of the Digital Sisters, Shireen Mitchell, of Digital Sisters. And what she said is accurate, accurate to the T. Everything is online now. All services, government services, job requests, healthcare. There's a lot of telehealth and things of that nature. How do you get access to these services if you don't have adequate internet access? And again, we're talking about access here in the United States. This is not some undeveloped nation that we're discussing. The digital divide in America is huge. As I said, 66 million people don't have adequate access to internet here in this country. That represents almost 20%, a little bit over 20% of the population. That is a lot of individuals who don't have access to internet. Thus, you have the internet, you have the digital divide. And then in addition, you have also the challenges that came about as a result of the pandemic. The pandemic actually created but the pandemic actually exposed the disparities that are currently in the system in terms of not having adequate internet access in the United States, because when many of the children were sent home, those that did not have internet access could not even complete some of their basic school lessons. And matter of fact, it talked about, and I'm reading an article here from the Harvard Business Review. They talked about the challenges of this, particularly that occurred in the Kansas City school district. So when the pandemic hit, there was a survey done, and basically they asked the teenagers in the Kansas City area, would they have the ability to do their homework? And the survey went out to about the teenagers in the age range of 13 to 17, and most of them reported that they would be either unable to do their homework or would have to do it sometimes because they did not have adequate internet access. 12 million children were without internet access altogether during the pandemic, and almost 55 million students had to move to online education during the pandemic, but 12 million didn't have any access at all. And then to add on to the issue, and they're talking specifically about the Kansas City school district, they didn't have internet access to send home, to send to the children, because in many districts, especially districts that had the resources, what happened was they sent the children home, and if they were in areas that didn't have internet access, they were provided hotspots, or laptops that had hotspots in them, so they could have adequate access. But here in Kansas City, because the investment in per student is so low, many of the students that went home had no internet access at all. And this story has been repeated over and over again throughout the country, from pre-pandemic and also post-pandemic. This is still a huge issue. It's noted here, and I'm reading this article from the Harvard Business Review, that nearly half of Americans without home internet were in Black and Hispanic households. It says here that almost 40% of the disconnected K through 12 students from Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities struggle not only with access, but also with digital literacy, which is also another huge issue, because, again, the digital divide has many layers. And today I'm just focusing on the broadband issue. There's also access to laptops and smartphones and digital literacy. The divide is in many areas. Today I'm just focusing on access, because access is really the foundation to be able to correct, or at least lift many of these issues that are currently occurring. But digital literacy is also a huge issue, because even after many individuals in low income areas or in minority areas get that access, you still need the digital literacy to how to best utilize it to enhance, and also to access greater information in the attempt to uplift and motivate from the circumstances that many of these children and individuals find themselves into. So it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And, there's been a lot of conversation around it, but I don't think it's been the conversation that has been enough to really move the needle, because, as I said before, access to internet is not just about having access just to say you on it. Crucial resources are connected to being on the internet, and without the access, many people in these communities get locked out of opportunity. Matter of fact, it states here, and again, I'm reading from the Harvard Business Review, that, without proper access, or if there's nothing being done or nothing significant that will be done to close the gap in the digital divide, many Black and Hispanic workers could be locked out of at least 86% of jobs by 2045 because everything has moved online. Again, the pandemic has exposed those disparities, but also it has left many people behind because now remote work is so common. You have to have internet access and you have to be in the areas that have the proper infrastructure, or you need to be able to have the type of financial means to afford adequate access to the internet. So, access has become like a crucial resource, just like water or any other resource that you have in a community that is needed to survive. So, what has been proposed, right? So we went through the issues. Let's talk a little bit about what has been proposed. So, one of the proposals that has been put on the table is the Roma tax. And the Roma tax was first suggested by Paul Roma, who's a Nobel laureate. And he suggested taxing the revenues on digital ads because, if you don't know, digital advertising is huge in terms of the amount of money that is spent by companies to advertise to get you and I to buy products. It's noted here that there was almost $41.5 billion spent on social media advertising in 2020. 26.2 billion was spent by advertisers on just advertising revenue, and they're expected to spend an additional 59.5 billion on search ads. So, we're talking, just in these three numbers, we're talking almost, well over $100 billion. So the Roma tax, what's suggested is that those revenues should be taxed at about 19%. And then that way the companies that the Facebooks and the Apples and the Googles that Facebook and Google really that have benefited from these these ad revenues would have to pay a higher tax that would then be redistributed to closing the gap in the digital divide here in the United States and worldwide. But again, today I'm just focusing on the United States. So that's one of the solutions that have been proposed. Also, coordinating locally with other states to find out best practices and best solutions. I was reading in terms of states that have, some of the strongest infrastructure and access to internet. New Jersey is like number one. They rank overall digital infrastructure. They're number one in terms of inclusivity. They're number one in terms of institutions that are prepared and have the ability to provide adequate access to the internet. They're number two. But in these cases, if many of these states would get together to discuss how they were able to come up with these solutions can then be rolled out from state to state, and that would help to alleviate the gap. Also, recruiting big tech firms and service providers to help close the gap. This kind of goes back to the Roma tax, but at the same time, many of these companies, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple, obviously they have and continue to benefit tremendously from consumers who can access the internet through purchase of their products and solutions and software. So what has been put on the table is that these companies do a little bit more to give back, so to speak, and to help build out infrastructure and also to provide more affordable solutions for for individuals to access the internet. Then you also have identifying gaps in areas and invite public and private solutions, update and expand existing affordability programs, which the Internet for All Act that Biden has Biden has produced does address that a little bit, but again, like I said in the beginning, it's really not enough. Matter of fact, it states here, however, the service quality was so poor that only 25% of eligible individuals took advantage of it. So, in cases where they have put out stronger, or in cases where they have tried to provide affordable internet, many times the internet service is not good enough, and it ends up that people get discouraged and they don't even use it, which is again part of the other problem. Providing affordable internet is key. And then, I think one of the most important solutions is building future proofing. And that is building out networks that will not only address the issues today, but also build out infrastructure that will continue to assist with the increase in population and also with the higher speeds, because many cases infrastructure has been built in certain areas, but then there has been no additional investment to it, or it was legacy and it was just built for that time period, and now the access is still inadequate. So building in future proofing to make sure that you're putting in infrastructure that can be upgraded just with maybe a software upgrade, as opposed to having to rip down, tear up, and then start over, I think is huge. So it's really important that companies consider this, and also government facilities, government entities consider this when trying to close the gap here in the United States regarding the digital divide. And then last, as I said before, investing in digital literacy, which is huge, because once you get this access, you have to understand how to use it. And not only how to use it, but how to benefit from it. And I think that will be huge as well. We can give the internet access, we can give access all we want, but if there's no digital literacy, just like anything else, it'll be ineffective in terms of usage. So those are some of the solutions on deck. I think, a lot of them make sense to me. In terms of getting these things enacted, it all comes down to the willingness of these companies to invest in these type of solutions. It depends on the governments working together, and then ultimately getting it into the hands of the people that need it most. And hopefully that is happening, or hopefully that will happen, and the gap will continue to be closed on the digital divide. So that's my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the people's voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. The people's voice.